Hello, and welcome to another episode of Brand Retro, the podcast where we talk about all things retro, but that connection between branding, marketing, and that retro mindset where brands are cultivated, created, and kind of come to life. And sometimes it's a process of even restoring, that feeling of the brand retro mindset to get back to that place where we first fell in love with our brand. Today, we're going to have a awesome guest. His name is Chris Campana. He's an independent comic book writer, creator, artist. I personally met Chris through being a fan of his art and being able to follow him in that way and just kind of see some of the awesome things that he's been doing over the years. Little background on Chris. Chris basically got his start, walked away from his normal 9-to-5 job to pursue his love and passion of comic books. He got his start back in 1997, did some independent work, a short story called Negative Burn for Caliber Comics, and since then has done several self-published, creator-owned type projects. Chris has worked with companies, big companies like IDW, Dynamite, Aftershock, and Cold War. He's done some really great things, and most recently did some independent stuff and was nominated for some awards for his work for The Adventures of Parker Reef, which is a very personal story for Chris and something, it's a bit of a passion project for him. Recently rolled out the second volume of that. So if you get a chance to check out his website at chriscampana.art, you can buy those copies there and also see some of the artwork he's been doing. This episode is also it's kind of been in the can for a while. So to be honest with you, it's been one we've been sitting on. We just haven't had time to produce it. So here it is. I hope you like it. All right, Chris, welcome to the podcast. Just to kind of set it up for you a little bit. Obviously, I do marketing, I do websites, I do logo and brand development. And the whole point and the core to my podcast is about finding that brand retro mindset and kind of playing off of that. And being a lover of retro and a lover of that kind of stuff, I thought it would mesh well with your industry and some of the things you're doing, because you're tapping into that kind of stuff constantly. I see the work that you're doing on an ongoing basis, and obviously I think you understand the brand and kind of the mission behind some of these things. So if you could just start us out a little bit with your background, your experience in comics.
Well, first, thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
I can't wait to make an absolute fool out of myself and talk about stuff that I pretend to know about.
Oh, yeah. I think you know more than you give yourself credit for.
I don't know, man. We'll see by the end of it. My background really, what I've been doing for the past 8 years is full-time comic artist. Prior to that, storyboards, video game design, all that kind of stuff. But really, I guess my major background is I'm a fan.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of this stuff. And I grew up, in the early 80s, late 70s, when I think the action figures and the cartoons were better. And that's really the whole reason why I'm sitting where I'm sitting now, is because of that stuff. So I'm a complete result of the toys I was able to con my parents into buying for me.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, because I'm the same as you. I started out as a fan of all these things, and now that I've obviously gotten older and I'm in the marketing business, I never realized there was such a business side to it. I always thought it was so simple that people just sat around with their colored pencils and they just doodled all day. And I'm like,
Right.
I mean, you're a kid, right? You don't know the difference, but now that you know the business and just the collateral side of what goes into everything,
Mhm.
how's that changed your perspective on it?
I feel used. No, I feel manipulated by everybody in those marketing rooms who knew that I was attracted to certain colors when I was a child. My whole thought, I don't know, it's weird. I've never, I mean, I know I value uh, artists and people such as you who can really think about brand and know those avenues to go down and all that kind of stuff. For me, um, I don't know. It's weird. I may not answer the question exactly how you're asking it, but for me, the whole brand thing and how it's changed, knowing what I know now as opposed to when I was a kid and I just dug the stuff, was I just try to do the same stuff now. What did I like about that? What did I dig about those things? And I think even if I didn't actively think about it. I think it's always spinning in my head anyway because it's so ingrained in what I grew up with. So I think by what is that, by osmosis or whatever, that I just happen to know a little bit about marketing and what may be appealing in a sense.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right. And I think one of the things I think is fascinating about the art community, and especially in the comic book industry, is that I don't know if you would consider yourself a brander, but at the same time, when you sit down and draw Spider-Man or whatever it is you're going to draw,
Hmm.
you're so committed to the details and the boundaries of what that character might possess or not possess, and how where it fits into the kind of the
Right.
scheme of things of whatever city they're in. So there's all
Yeah.
these rules and boundaries and brand consistencies that I think we don't call them that necessarily in the comic industry, but you're all very aware of them, and you're definitely paying your respects to those boundaries. So just like a graphic artist or somebody in media would create an ad campaign for Nike,
Hmm.
they have to consider all those brands and rules. I think when you
Yeah.
guys sit down, even though you're highly creative and probably flexing that muscle even more,
Right.
you're still very much in respect and in tune with what those brand boundaries are. And I see it from Superman to Spider-Man to whatever it is. Like you just kind of know there's certain ingredients that go in that soup,
Yeah.
and you're consistent with it.
Yeah. It's something about it's like staying on model. It's you get a like when I did something for Lady Death. I guess it was mid to late last year, and I'd never really drawn the character, and I wasn't too familiar with her. But you get your character sheets and everything that you're supposed to be doing and all that kind of stuff, and you learn about the character and you stay on model because there's a certain universe and obviously a fan base that is that adores this character, and you have to be cognizant of that, and if you're going to play in those worlds, you kind of have to respect those worlds and everything that's around it. Like I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day about staying on model, and it's like, if you're drawing Spidey, you got to remember that it's Pete inside the suit. It's not like, the body can't change a bunch from when he's Pete to when he's Spidey, and you can't draw the spider on his chest, on his forehead. You gotta kind of stay on what the brand, has been built as. I mean, you can go anywhere when I go to cons anywhere, you see kids that are so young, they have no idea what brand is, but somehow they know what every superhero is because it's just been built for so long. It's so crazy. So I'm always thinking about, like, when I drew a Moon Knight today. I had a commission that I did today. It was a Venomized Moon Knight, and because I have such a affinity for that character, for both actually, I could feel myself as I was digging into it, know what I would know how I should play in that sandbox in a sense because of what both those brands would want.
Yeah. And you extract those elements that you think kind of differentiate that brand or that character from another character,
Right.
and that's when you start to apply that creativity and that maybe that unique flavor that you bring to it, which is cool.
Well, yeah. Well, that was actually the thing today with the commission. It was with Moon Knight getting venomized essentially. I thought that Khonshu, the avatar from Moon Knight, would accept it. He wouldn't fight it. He would want that as part of that character. And if I was doing, say, Daredevil or Spidey or anybody else, more of like sort of the straight laced heroes, I wouldn't have attacked it that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because part of that brand is that the backstory, like you said,
Right.
it's Pete in the suit and
Right.
that kind of thing. So it's cool, and that's kind of why I've kind of focused on your guys' industry lately, is that I just love the commitment to branding, even though you don't call it branding. Like
No.
nobody really calls it that in the industry,
Well,
but
maybe in
but
other
it is.
rooms, but not in this room.
Not in this room, yeah. Well, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but that's one of the things I thought was cool about when we did your website, is that you already kind of somewhat created your brand loosely in the work that you're doing, and it
Right.
was it was kind of out there.
Hmm.
And for me, it was to collect it and try to pull it together and give you a brand look and feel that I thought represented who you are as an artist, what you're doing, and kind of what you can do springboard going forward. So, kind of a different take on it, but it was kind of fun to collect those elements and study your work to bring it all together.
That's crazy to think about. I mean, the site. I get a lot of compliments on the site, and it's weird to think that I've sort of developed unknowingly a brand. I remember one time we had a conversation. We were talking about the site and all that kind of stuff, and I remember saying to you, "It's cool when people like if somebody posts a drawing or something, they say, "Well, I really like Chris's Skeletor or Chris's take on Spawn or whatever." And it's so weird to think about having done this long enough to be known for a certain take
Yep.
on character, because surrounded in this studio, I'm surrounded by, other people's takes on the characters that I grew up on and that I, still collect to this day and all that kind of stuff. So to think that unknowingly there's this sort of my take on stuff, I'm just doing my best to not hate it when I'm done because of how much I love everybody else's take on the character. When one character I notice it the most on is Daredevil because I love John Romita Jr.'s Daredevil. I think he might. I don't know if there's anybody better than him on Daredevil back in the day. And when I draw him, I notice that I do certain things with the gloves and the boots, and all I'm trying to do is not embarrass myself by the time I'm done on that piece because it's not a John Romita Jr. Daredevil. So I never think this is a Campana Daredevil. I'm just like this is a don't embarrass yourself Daredevil.
Yeah, and I think subliminally, because I notice it when I touch certain projects too, that I think subliminally you've identified something in the way that John Romita Jr. does his Daredevil that you think is pivotal to the brand. So you'll never not put that ingredient
One
in
hundred
your soup
percent.
because it's in you now. It's part of it. And when somebody doesn't do it, it's almost wrong, right?
Well, it's funny because Lee Weeks, who might be one of the best artists ever, he does it a little bit too. And they just do these short gloves and these sort of a little bit exaggerated forms. And I look forward to doing those parts when I'm drawing Daredevil. Those are the parts that I guess, I don't know, you can get deep with it for a second. They resonate with a part of me that was young and reading comics.
Right.
There's even when you do sort of like the cast shadow on the horn, like the way you do the cast shadow on the horns. There's certain artists who did them certain ways, and that's the only way that. Now, granted, I probably do it obviously a little bit different because you're your own artist, but I didn't do it different until I kept doing it the way they did it because that's the way I liked it.
Right.
So that's like the craziness of what happens to you as an artist. Like you get asked all the time, how do you develop a style? I don't know. When I was coming up, when I first really decided I was going to be a comic book artist, I wanted to draw like Alfredo Alcala, and then I got a little bit older, and I wanted to draw, Frazetta, and then I wanted to draw like Todd McFarlane when I saw what he was doing because nobody had ever done that with Spidey, and I used to do everything I could to draw exactly like them.
Yeah.
I don't draw anything like those guys.
Right. And I think to your point is that because I remember even as a young artist and even doing whether it was logos or websites or even the stuff that I used to do when I did illustration work,
Mhm.
I used to think about, man, I got to develop my style. I've got to figure that out. And it's like, you can't. Like that's something that comes to you. You don't sit down and map that out. That's not how it works. And I know that now, but as a young artist, young creator, young graphic artist, I thought that was a thing for a long time. I thought,
Yeah.
well, where do I get that at? Can I buy that? Is it a book? Is it a trade? Yeah.
Well, I think it's got to be one of the most asked questions at shows is how did you develop? How do you have this style? Along with some of the other ones that are.
Yeah.
But I think as artists, we're so insecure that until you trust your own line on the page or in the commission, you don't have your own style yet.
Yeah.
There's even not nearly as often as when I was younger. But there are times when I'm struggling with something where I'll go into a book and I have a bunch of reference, to the left of me whenever I'm at the table. And when I see a certain layout or something, it's not that I copy the layout, but when I do something similar, it almost feels more accepted because there's every now and then there's a day that it's not working for you.
Yep.
And so when you see something that has been printed or has been done, and maybe a lot of artists don't do it, or maybe they won't admit it. I don't know. It just it is what it is. I'll put it onto the page, and then I'll work my own way through it, and then it becomes mine. But it always, starts as somebody else's. I think for
Yeah.
a certain period.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing, that even if your reference was Todd McFarlane or John Romita Jr. or whatever,
Mhm.
they probably got it from Joe Kubert or Jack Kirby or
Oh yeah,
wherever, because everybody's kind of, I don't want to say trying to one up, but you're always playing off the guy who came before
sure.
you. And eventually it kind of morphs into your own thing.
Yeah, you can get yourself in trouble that way too, though.
Oh, yep, yep.
Yeah,
But
you get your own way a lot, and
yeah,
really make some mistakes if you don't allow yourself to be, who you're supposed to be on the page.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah. So tell me about the industry itself. Where's your direction in all this? I know you said you've been at it for 8 years. I know
yeah,
you've done a lot of independent stuff versus the big name brand stuff, DC,
right,
Marvel, whatnot.
right.
Where do you like to be? What's the difference between the two worlds?
Well, if we were having this conversation, well, let's see. My first published work was 1997, and then 98 or 99 was Caliber, and then I was coming up with a bunch of other artists, and then life takes you on a direction. If we had the conversation then, undoubtedly it would have been I have to work on Spidey. I have to, because it seemed like I guess what a benchmark, or it had to happen, you know. And when I first came back in 12. I got hired, thankfully, pretty quickly by a couple of indies, and then went back into creator owned. And I've done, whatever I've done for IDW or Dynamite or whatever other stuff that I've done. And slowly, I think when I got to work on Telos a little bit, that was like a big deal because I remember picking that book up and just what Mike and Todd did in that book just like kind of blew my mind. And so that was kind of a dream gig sort of thing. But now, you know, I mean, there's always something going on, thankfully. I I feel like I will have opportunities at one of the big two, or, even if it's not considered the big two, if it's Boom or Dark Horse or whatever. But I don't think to myself, if you don't do that, you haven't succeeded. That's changed for me because we've spoken about this. I'm really lucky to have the fan base that I have, especially with not really having a massive, resume of those big two. To be able to do this full time, to be able to have pages, taped up on a wall behind me and people waiting for a book to come out and that kind of stuff. That is kind of the benchmark now. It's not, I think I could draw a pretty kick-ass Spidey book. I think I would do a pretty kick-ass Moon Knight book if I ever had the opportunity, or anything with DC. Like I think Green Lantern would be a great book for me with DC. I think I would draw a pretty gnarly Green Lantern. It's not. It's no longer. The goal is just to keep learning, keep getting better, and tell great stories, and to really kind of pay my respects to the fact that a lot of artists sort of paved their way for other artists to do it, and to make sure that the people who have followed along, I owe them a lot. So that's kind of where I sit. Just make sure you keep making books that people don't mind giving you a couple bucks for.
I am not obviously in your industry exactly, but that would be, hoping you agree with me here, that would be my advice to even young graphic artists and young creatives, is that
Mhm.
I think we all want to do the big ad for Nike, or we all want to draw
Right.
Spider-Man. We all want to go big.
Right.
Um, but you don't realize how massive that goal is. And there's a lot of work that can be done in between where you're at and Nike or Spider-Man or whatever it is. Because I talk to a lot of young artists who, I don't want to say they've got their goals set too high, because I think you should have high goals, but they kind of see it as a failure if they don't reach that point. And it's like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of good work to be done and a lot of cool things to do. And once you kind of find, because there's a a spot in this process where you find your style and it's comfortable and all that.
Yeah.
But there's a spot in this whole process too where you can still do some pretty fulfilling and successful things without actually getting to the top of the mountain either. So
It,
as artists, I think we're tough on ourselves, but I think
yeah.
that's part of the lesson, right?
You don't play like I always equate things to sports. I wouldn't be a professional baseball player if I didn't want to win the championship
Right.
and be the like, if I was a second baseman, I want to be the best second baseman in the league,
Yep.
you know. And as an artist, you want to be the best artist that you can be,
Yep.
and you want to, I guess, quote unquote, win the championship. But what is that championship to you? That's
Yeah.
kind of what it comes down to. Is it Spidey? Okay, well then I had somebody a couple years ago ask me what my dream book was, and I said Moon Knight, and they said, well, then you got to do everything you can to get Moon Knight.
Yep.
That's a great way to look at it. And again, I wouldn't turn it down, but it's not. I think as you get older, or if when you secure yourself at a certain spot in the industry, I think things can just sort of change, and I think when you're a young artist or when you're an aspiring artist, you look for these things to like hang on to mean that you've made it. You know, for me, I made it because my bills are paid and I'm okay.
Right.
And every now and then somebody will say that, and this is it's like one of those things where it's just so cool to go to a show or be online or something, and somebody say to you, "That's inspiring," or "Oh wow, that's makes me want to go sit at the table," or something like that. That's better than drawing Spidey to me.
Right.
I think it just changes. I want to be the best storyteller that I can be, but there are so many other things that go into getting that Spidey book. It's not always just about your talent. It's about timing. It's about all these other things.
Yep.
Cream rises, sure, but if it's not the path that you're supposed to be on, you can't then hate the path that you're on.
Right.
You just got to do the best you can on that path, and then everything will sort of, come off of that.
Right. I guess that maybe that's what I should have said is there's an equation to some of this stuff. And I think the lofty goals are great, but you gotta kind of wait for that equation to work out in your favor.
Right.
Plus you gotta just put the work in. That's the one thing I'm sure you've had this throughout your life too, but you're born with a certain amount of talent, and then you compile thousands and thousands of hours on top of it to
Yeah.
get it to where you're at. You
Yeah.
know,
Like again, at shows, because so much of my interaction happens at the table. I'll have parents come to the table and they'll say, what's your advice? What is how can my son or daughter, make it as a comic artist? Because it's all they want to do. And it's so much about the work,
yeah,
and it's so much about real work like anatomy and gesture and perspective and all these things that, you know, um, you can't learn from comics, but you need to know to do comics.
right,
You know, it's so much about all the other stuff that you have to put into to get to those lofty goals to ascend. I guess it is. I think it's weird when people say, "Chris, you're talented." I really think I'm driven, not talented. In a sense, I think I can draw, and I don't think anybody can just pick up a pencil and do something that I did when I was 10, or like maybe my 10-year-old drawing looks better than some other 10-year-old drawings. But it's the drive. It's the you want to break your pencils, and then you kept going the next day. That to me is the part that differentiates from just talent. I think it's drive.
yep. I would totally agree. I think that's true on the marketing entrepreneurial side.
Right.
But even the conversations I've had with you, like you said, I put all my chips on the table.
Yeah.
This is what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I don't really have a choice of
No.
fail. I don't have a choice. I can't fail. I,
No.
I gotta I gotta grind.
Yeah. It was. I've said this to a ton of people, and a lot of people disagree, and that's totally fine. We can disagree. I think if you have a plan B, sometimes you don't go after your plan A as hard as you should. Now, you need to be in a certain position to be able to go after your plan A that hard, which is why I couldn't at some degrees in my life. But I just think you have to be prepared to fall, but that doesn't mean you're going to fail.
Right.
Now, at some point in your life, it may just be that you might need somebody to say to you, this isn't it. Because there are people who, like, if I wanted to be a professional baseball player and I'm like, well, nobody's stopping me. There's no plan B. And I'm 46 years old and I clearly have not been drafted. Somebody's going to have to tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, man, it might be time to hang them up.
Right.
But until that day, I think you have to go for it and also be self-aware enough to self, critique and self-scout yourself and look at what the landscape of the industry is. And if you can find, your spot, do it. But also understand that maybe sometimes a dream is a dream and it can't always be reality. Sometimes that harsh sort of truth.
I think that's true in any industry, but like what I do with my business every year is am I going backwards? Am I flat or am I going forward?
Yeah.
And not that I've changed my position in what I want to do or how I want to drive it, but I need to check in with myself once in a while to make sure this is still going the same direction I wanted it to.
Yeah.
So,
not a lateral move. Like at least we're progressing.
Right.
Yeah.
If you'd like to learn more about the Cyberdogz experience, check us out online at cyberdogzmarketing.com for updated blogs, new podcast episodes, examples of previous work, and the brands we have and are currently working with, and much, much more.